So let's just talk a little bit at the outset about what the project was all about, what the reporting was all about. And of course, I have two people here who can explain it a whole lot better than I can, but I want to give you a little bit of an overview. And I want to give a couple of shout outs really quickly. One to Jeff McDonald, who is a UT watchdog reporter, who was also key in working on these stories, as well as Lauren Schroeder, a data reporter at the Union Tribune, who also worked hard on these stories as well. So the first story, I believe, was posted in September of 2019, is that correct, Kelly? Okay. And the story was the result of a 6-month investigation looking at the county's jail mortality rate. The numbers, what the numbers told us, as well as who those numbers represented. So as you all are probably well aware, no story that we tell is only about data. It's about how that data is representative of people and people's lives and people's stories. And I think that this is a project that exemplified that quite well. So San Diego County's jail mortality rate was highest among the state's largest jail systems, so that would include Los Angeles, which is a much larger jail system, as you well know, San Bernardino, Sacramento. The story explains some of the various reasons why that may be, and really held those responsible for maintaining the jail system, maintaining the health systems involved in the jail systems, to account for why this was happening and how it might change in the future. So I think that's enough exposition from me. Except to say that at least when that first story was written, there had been at least 140 people who had died in county custody since 2009. Those numbers don't seem to have changed much in terms of the rate. In fact, they seem to be getting pretty worse. We hit 19 for 2022 at this point, and that's a yearly high, is my understanding. So we're going to talk a bit about what this all means and how the story came together. So in order to do that, I suppose the first thing I want to ask to these folks here on the panel is, Kelly in particular, how did the story come to you? What was it that, I know my team, my public safety team, we write a lot of stories, a lot of briefs, frankly, about this person died in custody, that person died in custody. And by the way, I don't mean to be flippant or glib about any of that. We're talking about a person's life. But how did you decide to do more than that? That there was something that was worth delving into a bit deeper?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the introduction, Dana. And actually, this story started prior to 2019. It started in 2013 when I was at a newspaper called San Diego City Beat that's no longer around. And interestingly, it started with a phone call from Jeff McDonald, who I had no idea at the time that 6 years in the future we would be collaborating together for a story for the UT. But Jeff called me up and he said, there's a guy who died in jail. His name was Russell Hartsaw. I think something bad happened to him. I don't have time to look into this story. Can you look into it? And so I put in a request for Mr. Hartsaw's autopsy report, and immediately you could see that there was something wrong. Russell was 70 years old. He was gay. He was very frail. He was mentally ill. He was in jail for threatening someone with a broken taser. This was, I think, July or August of 2012, actually. And so what happened with Russell is he was put in protective custody because he was such a vulnerable person. And he was also he had a very storied history. He used to rob banks and spent a lot of time in federal prison and then turned his life around. But he was a little bit of a smart ass, kind of knew his way around jails and prisons. And he talked his way out of protective custody, which he should not have been able to do. There's a process for releasing someone from protective custody. And just one look at him and the deputy should not have released him from protective custody. So he was put into this dorm-style, barracks-style unit, and the unofficial kind of head of that unit was an incarcerated person who went by the nickname of Evil. And the first night Russell was in that dorm unit, Evil corralled some other guys, and they very, very violently beat Russell to death, killing him. And so after looking into this and talking to my colleague at the time, his name is Dave Moss, Dave said, why don't we look into a whole year's worth of deaths? And so we pulled a lot of autopsy reports. And then Dave said, why don't we look into 6 years worth of deaths? And we chose the 6-year mark because in 2006, the jails had made some policy changes, so we thought that was a good starting point. And what we ended up finding at the time was that we used, we called up the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which tracks deaths in custody, and we said, what would be the best way to calculate the mortality rate? And the head of the program, the Deaths in Custody Reporting Program, explained it to us. So we ran the calculations and found that San Diego had the highest mortality rate of the 10 largest jails in California and the second highest suicide rate. So we reported that, and Dave left to take another job, and I continued to report on jail deaths because they continued to happen. They continued to horrify me. And then I left City Beat, started freelancing for the UT, and I was so fortunate that they let me pick up my reporting and work with Jeff McDonald, and as Dana said, we spent 6 months working on an investigation. And since then, deaths have continued to happen. You know, as Dana pointed out, there have been 19 deaths so far this year. So it's you know, I tell folks it seems like there's never a week without a new death, a new lawsuit, a lawsuit settlement. It's kind of the story that will never end. So that's where I am now. And I know Julia, I met Julia back in 2013 because you were doing jail death cases too, and so yeah, you wrote about a couple of your cases. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah,
Julia, talk about how she got it.
So I got into this case by accident, and what really got me started on doing these jail death cases is that during one of the depositions, the deputy testified that after our client died, they killed him over a hot cup of water. After they killed him by smothering him, they all sat in the poor girl's office, watched all of the videos together before writing their reports. That is really unheard of. I've been litigating these cases against very different municipalities and states, and that had never been done before. That is sort of 101 what not to do when you are investigating a misconduct in any setting. So I knew that this jail had some problems, and I think I come from nonprofit work, and so I was always interested in impact litigation, meaning you take on a case for one individual with the hopes that you make a change for everybody else vis-a-vis policy changes. So that set me on this path, and as we litigated these cases, we uncovered, I mean, that was the tip of the iceberg. That was the least of my problems. There have been so many different types of problems really unique to this county. So here we are.
We're going to talk a lot about, I'm a loud person, so you can go on to that. So we're going to talk a lot about what those challenges are, what those problems are, what the issues that you uncovered within the county were and still are. But I want to ask you, I mean, just kind of a nuts and bolts kind of question here. You know, we're talking about a significant number of deaths, and a number of deaths that is significantly higher, a rate that is significantly higher than we see in all of the other large counties in the state of California. What was happening to these people? Was it all drugs? Was it all, something related to perhaps a mental illness? Can you kind of explain for the crowd here what you were seeing? in terms of how these people were dying?
So many people suffer from mental illness. I believe our initial count was 60%. So far this year, of the 19 deaths, we know that 8 of those folks suffered from mental illness. And that's just something that kept coming up. And what I think happens is, someone with severe mental illness, they don't know how to advocate for themselves, or they're written off as being crazy. There was a young man named Lyle Woodward who was mentally ill, bipolar, schizophrenia. He was placed in a cell with a guy who was in for committing a violent felony. I'm not remembering exactly what it was. And one of the ways his mental illness manifested itself is he would speak uncontrollably. So I can only assume he kind of drove his cellmate crazy, and his cellmate beat him to death. And what we found out later through depositions in that case is that deputies would just put 2 guys in a cell together, put the crazies together to see what happens. So I think it's that lack of empathy that is shown up in so many cases. I remember another case, a severely mentally ill gentleman who'd been in the state hospital system and was transferred to San Diego jails for a hearing. And over the course of 2 months, I think, he lost 50 pounds. Nobody noticed. You'd think someone losing 50 pounds, someone would notice that, and he died of pneumonia. I can only think that he was showing signs of pneumonia. Maybe he was saying he couldn't breathe, but he wasn't paid attention to. He wasn't given the care that he needed. And so we see that over and over again, people dying of a stomach ulcer, pneumonia, treatable conditions. And yeah, so many of those folks have a mental illness. Addiction is another huge issue. The jail just recently started a medication-assisted treatment program, which is actually a great development. I hope to look into that a little more to see who's getting this treatment, but that will hopefully help with withdrawal, because drugs are rampant in jail, and when someone's going through withdrawal, which is just an unbelievably horrific process, I've had folks describe it to me, they just want to die. And if someone's offering them, fentanyl, heroin, something, they're going to take it. And that's why we've seen so many overdoses.
Anything to add in terms of, I don't know how far you can get into, what has happened with your clients, but I would imagine you have some stories that you could share in terms of how they were affected by it.
Yeah, so that's very typical. I think in many different cases, people are just ignored to death. And it's absolutely true that people get picked up and put into jails, not because they committed a crime, but they're perceived as having criminality of some sort because they are mentally ill. Paul Silva had the same experience. He was just schizophrenic and was off his meds, and the family specifically called for mental health help. He had committed 0 crimes. But when police showed up, they perceived his mental illness as being an act of crime. They assumed that he was high on drugs when toxicology reports indicated that he had taken no methamphetamine at all. And what happened is they put him in a temporary holding cell for 36 hours, and because he fully decompensated, and within the last 24 hours they didn't give him any food or water, he was put in a cell with no bed, no chair, nowhere to sit, no bedding, no clean clothes. And there was nowhere for him to rest, and there was constant light and sound, so he couldn't rest. So even if he didn't have a mental illness, that would have really driven somebody over the edge about 36 hours, and he also was hypoglycemic and he was dehydrated. So all of those symptoms combined meant that he really couldn't respond to the orders being given to him. And they had to do a cell extraction at that point because he was too far gone. There was absolutely no need for that. And because of the use of force, Paul Silva died. So those circumstances form the basis for many, many deaths. But other circumstances are that they know that a particular person has a need for medication, very significant health conditions, and they don't give that medication and they end up either dying or suffering from significant consequences.
One of the cases Julie is handling right now is a young man named Michael Wilson. Yes, sorry, there's a lot of names. He died on Valentine's Day of 2018, and his lung, he had congestive heart failure.
It was 2019, I'm sorry.
So his lungs were had so much fluid in them. The autopsy report showed that his lungs weighed twice what normal human lungs should weigh. And I always, if I'm at a doctor's appointment, I always quiz the nurse on what about, things I will see and hear. And I said, well, would you be able to hear if somebody's lungs were that congested? And she says, oh yes. And they knew he had congestive heart failure, and they should have been able to hear the sound in his lungs. And within 10 days, I think, was it 10 days or less than that? Yeah, he died. So yeah, things like that, just you just wonder why, what's going on here. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I'm intrigued by this phrase that you used, Julia, just moments ago. You said ignored to death. And from the standpoint of a journalist, part of our job, a big part of our job is making people see something, even when they don't necessarily want to see it. And so I would imagine one of the challenges of reporting a story like this is something we know all too well. I cover crime, my team covers crime, and you're covering this particular issue and many others. But one of our challenges is to not only make people see it, but make people understand and absorb it and to care about it. So how, in a situation like this, when you're dealing with a population of people and a circumstance that a lot of us aren't used to dealing with personally, I've never been to many jails, but I've not been incarcerated. So how do you get a person like me who has never been in that position to care about this population? I recognize how cynical that sounds, but it is something that we are working against as we are reporting. And I wondered if you could speak to that. And then Julia, you're dealing with kind of the same issues when you are in a courtroom and when you are in front of a jury, where perhaps the jurors don't have a direct connection to this population or this set of circumstances. I would imagine they don't have a direct connection. That's not personally a challenge. So,
This slide.
So that was a long question, but I'm hoping that you can.
So what we have here, I just threw this together real quickly. Deaths since 2009. Deaths this year. It says 18. I know it said 19. There was one person who was released from custody hours before he died, and so we're kind of in a debate with the sheriff's department over whether to count that or not. We are kind of counting that death because they waited so long to release him and give his family a chance to say goodbye to him. I think, two things we always point out. You see this, let's see, hold on, it's right in the middle there. The custody status sentence, booked awaiting trial. So these people haven't been charged with anything. Any of us could end up in jail for something, for a mistake we made, and we would be booked awaiting trial. So, to write them off as criminals, they haven't been charged with anything yet. And then we also talk a lot about how much this has cost the county. We're up to $37.6 million. One thing that's really stunning about that, the decade prior to, so we published our Diamond Behind Bars story in 2019. The decade prior to 2019, I'm sorry, hold on, let me rephrase that. Between 1999 and 2009, lawsuit settlements payouts of $1.9 million. Between 2009 and 2019, lawsuit payouts were $7.9 million. And so this is since 2009. You can see that they've really picked up exponentially since 2019. If we went from 7.9 to, sorry, I keep turning around and reminding myself, $37.6 million. And the county is self-insured, so this is taxpayer money. So if you don't have empathy for the folks who are dying in jail, at least as a taxpayer, you know, that should grab your attention.
So I'm sorry, then I forgot the original question.
Well, I'm asking about how you reach a person on this topic who might not have any direct association with the people, the topic, the circumstances that we're discussing here.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's really what the county is banking on when they litigate these cases to death. Their assumption is that the general public doesn't care. Why would they care? These are, you know, they're thrown away people. Why would a jury, especially in federal court, you have to have a unanimous jury, why would they care? So that has been their attitude, and that's really part and parcel of why we are here in the situation that we find ourselves in. But really to frame it, you know, as Kelly had talked about, these are people who have not been convicted of a crime. They haven't had their day. They're innocent until proven guilty, and they're sitting in a jail where they're just assumed to be criminals. And even if they had been convicted of a crime, they are still entitled to the protections of the Constitution. If we don't protect those people, none of us should be protected. And I just want to remind people, this is difficult because also his family is here, so I feel sort of the weight of that. We're talking about people who truly loved by their families.
Absolutely.
And they're valued members of our community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's true. I've spoken with so many heartbroken families, and you know, we try to tell everyone's story as best we can, and find their families and find out about them. If we can't find their families, look through court records to see what their path was, what got them to this point. Just want to point out one more thing.
Please.
The Sheriff's Department promised greater transparency with jail deaths. They promised to release information within 24 hours. They promised to follow up with preliminary autopsy reports and report the names of folks who died as soon as the family was notified. You could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there was a death a couple weeks ago. 6 people, we don't even know who they are. And so it makes it hard for journalists to hold them accountable because we don't know who they are, which some of them I do know their names because things get around. But it's really frustrating that the county is not being as transparent as they promised.
So we're at 18 or 19, depending on how you calculate the number of deaths. And to be clear, I'm sure it's obvious to a lot of you, but when we're talking about in custody, the person doesn't have to necessarily physically be in the confines of the jail facility. You know, you can still be in county custody, be in jail custody if, for example, you've been you're being looked over in a local hospital, but you're still under the authority of the county jail and therefore the sheriff's department. So we're at 18 or 19 now, a record high. Why is it still happening?
I don't know. I wish I had the answer.
Yeah, that wasn't meant to stump you. It was meant to elicit this discussion that it is hard to pin down.
Yeah, I do want to say there have been fewer suicides. When I started reporting on this, the county's suicide prevention policy was a few sentences long. Now it's many, many pages long, and so we're seeing fewer suicides, I think, because they're really trying to prevent suicides. But there are cases that happen, and you just like, why? Like, I don't know. It stumped me. I want to, you know, I would love to spend more time in the jails and observe more and try to understand it better and see if I can answer that question. I don't know. Do you want to give it a shot?
So you know that the system is terribly broken and things have gone sideways when I am the person to tell a nurse for the first time during her deposition that her failure to provide medication to a patient led to him being in a coma. So back in 2018, a nurse chose not to give a patient with epilepsy his anti-seizure medication. The jail placed him on top of a triple bunk, so he suffered a seizure, fell approximately 6 to 7 feet onto concrete. They had to drill a hole in his head so he wouldn't die. Between then and her deposition, 2.5 years had passed. Not a single person in leadership had approached this nurse to tell her that her mistake had almost cost somebody's life. In the intervening 2.5 years, the same nurse failed to provide medication to Michael Wilson that we just talked about, who died. So he had congestive heart failure, and a judge had written in a note, he was only there for flash incarceration, which means you're in there for a period of several days, you come out because whatever minor issue that you had, right? You broke curfew or whatever it is. So he was serving a flash incarceration, and he was there for 10 days, and the same nurse, instead of giving him his required medication, gave him Robitussin. And we know that this is a system-wide problem because it wasn't just that nurse, it was 4 other nurses that failed to give him his medication, and he slowly drowned to death. And it's not like they didn't know that this is going to happen because Michael Wilson's mother is a school nurse. She had called multiple times to say, this has happened before, he's going to die. He's going to die of drowning to death if you don't take him to the hospital. Nobody did anything. There were calls from the sister saying the same thing. So they chose to ignore that. What has happened in those 2.5 intervening years between the 2018 failure to provide medication to a patient with epilepsy and the deposition, and actually, quite frankly, to today's date, so we've been litigating that case for almost 5 years. What has happened is not some sort of remedial action or some training of these nurses or doctors that have failed the patients, but what has happened is just refusal, steadfast refusal to take responsibility, to hide the evidence. What has been really made public in the last 6 months is really something that is stunning, that's really never happened as against any other municipality or agency, is that in the last 2 trials, 2 different federal judges have found that the lawyers representing the county had engaged in misconduct. That, just to put that into perspective, I've been a lawyer for 24 years, that's never happened to me before, for any other agency. So this is unusual, and it is really jaw-dropping as a lawyer to see that happen. So you know that this is a pattern. So it's not just the jails, it is what happens after somebody is injured, the way they handle litigation, the way they attack the families and the victims instead of taking responsibility. That really just creates this culture that's deeply embedded in never taking responsibility, and that's why we have these continuing deaths.
Do you want to say something?
Just add something real quick. Bill Gore retired early from his position as sheriff in February, actually the very same day that a pretty highly critical, folks use the term state audit came out that confirmed San Diego jails have the highest mortality rate of California's large counties, and the state audit urged legislators to pass laws to fix San Diego jails because they didn't believe the jails would fix themselves. But for the whole time I've been reporting on this, never once got a chance to speak to Gore. Told a couple times he would show up for an interview, he never did. He never took responsibility. It's only been recently that in the press releases on these deaths that they will say, our condolences go out to the family. It took them years to say anything like that, anything that showed, compassion. And I think admitting that there's a problem is the first step to solving the problem. And all we've heard over the last, nearly decade was we did nothing wrong, it's not our fault. It's the journalist's fault for, misrepresenting the data, which we now know we did not, because the state audit confirmed it. So yeah, I think just the failure to take responsibility has been a huge issue.
Has anything changed at all inside the jails since, you've been doing this litigation, since the stories have run, since you have really gone straight to the sheriff's department to say, this is the problem, here's what the numbers show? Have they made any changes, particularly after the audit?
They say they have. So just another example, in April, I did not know this, I just found out, but apparently in April of this year, the Sheriff's Department made an announcement, a press release that they will be releasing publicly all of their investigation materials to be transparent, and those are called CURB, Critical Incident Review Board. So when somebody is killed or something terrible happens inside a jail, they do an internal review of why and how that happened. So Kelly Martinez has said she's going to make all of those documents publicly available. 2 weeks ago, her lawyer filed documents in court saying that nobody should have access to those documents because of attorney-client privilege. A judge had already ordered them to be produced in my case, but now they have taken this position that they are sacrosanct and nobody should lay their eyes on these documents. So, they are still talking out both sides of their mouths, and they say something to appease the public, but in reality, they're doing something completely different.
And we've seen folks who wanted to be reformers pushed out. There was a particularly tragic case where a mental health clinician who just absolutely adored her clients was carrying a huge caseload. She was one of the good ones, one of the people we want to see more of. And on her day off, they moved one of her clients who had repeatedly threatened to kill himself. They moved him into administrative segregation, which is basically solitary confinement, and he died by suicide. And so she comes back to work and finds out that this is what happened to her patient, despite all her, hard work to try to keep him safe. And so I think a lot of good people have left in disgust, or because their attempts to recommend changes have fallen on deaf ears.
I think that now's a good time to open it up to questions from the group. We need a microphone.
We're going to have to move the microphone.
Oh, only one, sorry.
Yeah.
Budget.
I have a series of them. I'll try to bunch them up. As far as not ignoring those that were so easy to ignore, San Diego Union should be an editorial board in both Louder and Delta and the other room. We need to stay on top of the county of San Diego, not just the sheriff's department. The sheriff is an elected official, and but yet there are other elected officials who carry the purse strings. Nathan Fletcher has done a little bit there as far as making. He's made some lip service to it. You also have the sheriff's review board, but they also have the purse strings over county council. County council, who you've shown us, has been so unethical, if not corrupt, by the judges. And so I guess I'll be looking for some feedback on being relentless and having the editorial boards and your newspapers stay on top of the people who have the purse strings over the sheriff's department and the county council, and even the sheriff's review board. And secondly, the question that would be more appropriate is as far as review of these deaths. There has been change in the way in-custody deaths are reviewed, that in theory, perhaps not in the jails, and that's the question I have. What San Diego PD would get involved in an in-custody death investigation for the sheriffs, and vice versa. So is San Diego PD now helping to investigate in custody deaths in the jails, or is that just before they get to the jails? And your thought about if that's true, is there a thin blue line that it won't even matter if San Diego PD is doing that? And I think that's enough. Thanks.
Well, I do know, as I think you alluded to, that the San Diego PD, for example, will investigate an incident where sheriff's department has shot someone, out in the field somewhere. There's an incident, a deputy shoots someone. That is now investigated by San Diego PD, and vice versa. If it's San Diego PD that shoots someone, again, this is out in the community, then the sheriff's department will investigate. So you don't have the institution investigating itself. That is supposed to be the way that works. However, I do not know off the top of my head if that extends to the deaths that occur inside the jails.
I don't know. Do you know?
I do know. So the way it works with the jails, if there is a jail death and there's no use of force, no shooting incident, no law enforcement person involved in that death in custody, then the agency, the sheriff's office, continues to investigate its own jail deaths. There's a couple cases, Paul's was mentioned, where there was a use of force and a death. In that case, San Diego Police, by agreement, would then come in and investigate that use of force, which then caused a death involved.
And I don't know the numbers as well as you do, but the vast majority of these cases are not use of force type deaths, correct? Okay.
My first appearance.
My first appearance.
One thing, the County Board of Supervisors has ordered the Sheriff's Department to spend a certain amount of Sheriff's Department money on better body scanners and I think better mental health treatment, invest more money in mental health treatment. It is unprecedented for a County Board of Supervisors to order a sheriff to do anything because a sheriff is an elected position, is independent, and so it's been really interesting to see the Board of Supervisors kind of say, no, you're going to do this. This is what you're going to spend your money on. So hopefully we'll see some improvements from that.
Do we have any other questions? We have a few.
Have you looked at the data with regards to the juvenile detention?
Juvenile detention?
Serious injury and death in juvenile detention in San Diego?
I know, I have reported on a suicide that happened several years ago, and I know there was a death, an overdose death, and I'm waiting on that autopsy report. I do not know about serious injuries, though. I've not looked into that, but I will. Thank you. Is there anything in particular that...
My son was arrested about a month ago, and the police couldn't decide if they were going to take him to this place, the big adult jail, or the juvenile detention, because he was 17 and 10 months. And so I stood on the corner, yelling my head off, saying, you can't take him anywhere unless you know where you're taking him. I will go with you. And they just, eventually, after an hour of more police officers showing up and me kind of yelling my head off, they just released him to me. So now we wait and see what happens. And so he was arrested because he evaded a police officer. A police officer was trying to pull him over and he didn't pull over. So he just came home because he's stupid. But the fact that they didn't know where they were going to take him alarmed me. And then I saw your talk here and I was like, oh, I will go to that just in case they take him there at some point.
Yeah, it can be exceedingly difficult to get any information out of the juvenile system. But I appreciate your question. Maybe that is something we need to look at a bit closer. I don't want to... Should we get the other side of the room?
Yeah, I'll go around the other side too, yeah.
We see you.
Hi, I'm Maritza Macho. My question is, so obviously not much change has happened since your investigation. If you put yourself in the shoes of the sheriff, the police, what solutions would you have to resolve the situation?
I would just to say, boost a good dose of empathy. I know that's very vague and abstract, but I think seeing the people that I do think a lot about what a difficult position deputies are often in, because there are people who will say that they want to go to the infirmary and they're not really sick, they just want to get out of their cell for a while. At the same time, deputies should always err on the side of caution. But I think empathy, just good dose of empathy training to see these incarcerated folks as people, as somebody's son, somebody's husband, somebody's brother. I think that would go a long way. Do you have anything from your cases that really stands out?
Yeah, I mean, really, generally, the answer is very simple. And that's just taking accountability and doing something to fix it. I mean, anybody who's ever had a job or run a business, if an employee does something wrong, you have to take corrective action. Any other job, if your employee kills somebody, you might have something to say about it. But it is astonishing that the County of San Diego does not do that. Instead, they just tell lies. They tell lies to clerk about what had happened. They tell lies to the community. They tell lies to the family. After my client, Frankie, fell from a third bunk bed, they told the family that he slipped while he was climbing, right? They made it seem like the other cellmates had something to do with it. So it's just consistent lying. And for the county itself, it's really the problem of leadership. I don't fault so much the individual deputies and nurses, because sometimes it's just a mistake. But if you double down, triple down on that mistake by lying about it and covering up, what do you think will happen? There is such a culture of not caring, because this is how the leadership has formulated an answer to a problem.
And that's where real transparency comes into play, and heavy emphasis on the term real. I understand that there are confidentiality issues when we're talking about a person's health records and health conditions, but in terms of how the systems are operated and how they can and should and will or won't change, those are the kinds of things that we've been trying to get at. I say we because as a reporter, I tried to get at this myself many years ago as well. And it's just extremely difficult to get any kind of real straightforward answer out of the county on how they do things. Let your doctors talk to us. That's my 2 cents on this. Whoops, I'm supposed to be the moderator.
So I went to the sheriff's debate or watched it online for the candidates, and I was surprised to see that Hammerling seemed more progressive, the supposed Republican, than Kelly Martinez, who would not really take any culpability for anything going on, any negative aspects that have occurred. And I know you're not on the editorial side, but UT, I was surprised earlier that they had endorsed Hammerling, but Dave Myers was out of the race. But they withdrew the Hammerling endorsement because he made some disparaging comments about transgender individuals. But after that, Myers had a meeting with him and is now endorsing Hammerling. So I'm just wondering whether it's not your bailiwick, but whether the UT is going to re-examine their endorsement prior to the election, because I think it has a strong bearing on how people vote.
Oh, there we go. There's somebody who can answer that question. Thank you for pointing out the distinction between the news side and the editorial side. There is editorial side.
Yeah, let her ask.
She can answer a question. Editorial. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Laura Castaneda and Christy Thomas right here. We're both members of the editorial board at the San Diego Union Tribune. And I wanted to first mention that on October 25th at 6 p.m., we'll have an in-person forum with the two candidates, so I hope all of you go and tell 100 people that you know to go at the San Diego Central Library. If you can't make it, that will actually be online later so that you can watch it. But I can't think of a better opportunity for voters to put the questions before them to have them right here in front of you. And as far as the endorsement, I will tell you that we spend a lot of heated moments. There's 7 of us on the editorial board and nothing comes easy. So there's a lot of discussion that goes behind it. We are aware of all the wonderful reporting that Kelly does and all of the concerns that have been brought forward, and there will be much more discussion before anything else comes out of it. So I want to assure you that we're looking, we're reading, we're asking questions. We don't always get the answers that we want. So I just wanted to let you know that.
A little bit over time, but let's get that last question.
Yeah.
If you could.
So my question, thank you both for, like, all of you for doing all the wonderful work you're doing. Can you quickly speak to the disparity between the male and the female deaths? What the circumstances are? Are there fewer females in jail, or are they treated differently? I'm just looking at the top.
There's only one woman's jail, and we see about 1 or 2 deaths a year in the women's jail. I don't know. I think it's just a less harsh place, maybe less use of solitary confinement, probably a more compassionate staff, just because you're in it. It's also a newer jail, and it was designed to be very gender responsive, trauma informed. So I think those are some of the reasons why you don't see as many deaths there. I just want to say something really super quick about John Hemmerling. He's, you want to see candidates with fresh new ideas. Like, that's what I've wanted to see in this race. And he recently brought up using blockchain to help reform the jails. And so I asked him what that was about. This isn't a John Hemmerling endorsement, but I'm super interested in this. And if you guys are interested in this, it's something to keep an eye on. So blockchain is a way to store information, and he wants to use it to better synchronize medical treatment. So you look one person up and you can see everything, including if they've been, at the psych hospital on the outside, or if they've been through drug treatment. You could see what their family has said when their family has called in to, request better care. So this kind of better overall system of keeping information and sharing information is so important, and it's piqued my interest, and so definitely something I hope that is brought up in the UT candidates forum in October or later this month.
I do have to wrap this up. If anybody wants to hang around and ask some questions afterward, I'm sure you can do that. One quick reminder, we do have a presentation coming up. I think they might be opening up the larger room in just a few moments for Marcus Yam, who is a foreign correspondent, staff photographer with the LA Times. Fantastic, Pulitzer Prize winning work. Please make sure you don't miss out on that. Thank you all for your time, for your attention.